These are German police officers raiding mosques and organizations in Berlin. These places are suspected of links to a Shiite Muslim group called Hezbollah, Arabic for Party of God. It happened right after the government declared Hezbollah a terror group, following in the footsteps of many others, including the UK, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. Hezbollah was formed some 40 years ago in this tiny Middle Eastern country. It has since expanded its reach to almost every continent on the planet. Its operations have often been violent, but the group's activities are multifaceted.
It's quite striking, quite interesting how difficult it seems to be for political analysts, political scientists, the think tankers in the world to really understand what Hezbollah is.
So what exactly is Hezbollah? And why has its reach now spread so far from where it began? Let us unpack that for you. Part of the reason why Hezbollah is so difficult to pin down is that it's an organization that spans many categories.
So Hezbollah is a political party. It is a social welfare organization. It has civilian organizations. It is a standing militia, larger, better funded, better armed than the Lebanese armed forces. And it is also a terrorist organization that engages in acts of terrorism at home in Lebanon and abroad, as well as a transnational criminal organization.
It considers itself at the same time a state and a non-state actor. It was born in an environment where the state was absent or weak, and where Hezbollah believed that it can fill all the gaps.
Being a hybrid organization has advantages for Hezbollah. The many hats it wears are all a means to one end, spreading what it calls an ideology of resistance as far and as wide as possible.
It's based on the idea that Hezbollah leads the resistance against oppression, against the stronger powers in the region, but also on a global level. That's why it's always had a very strong anti-Israeli, of course, anti-Zionist, but also anti-American discourse, because it positioned itself as the defender of those that nobody takes care of, that are suffering from the oppression of colonial, imperialist, or whatever powers in the region. This is the main narrative of Hezbollah, and this is its raison d'etre, actually.
This is just one, but a big factor in Hezbollah's popularity. Its followers see the group as standing up for the disempowered. Just take a listen to what some of its supporters say.
الوقفة التضامنية اللي نحن بنوقفها مع الشعب المظلوم، الشعب يلي عم تتآمر عليه كل أمريكا والسعودية.
السيد من يومه، من يوم ما الله خلقه، هو سيد الحكمة وسيد المقاومة وسيد الناصر وسيد السلم الأهلي.
Under its leader Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah has gained enduring popularity, reflected in its election results. It has won seats in every parliament since 1992 and has participated in governments since 2005. There are entire parts of the country believed to be dominated by the group. And while it also has many detractors in Lebanon, here's a glimpse of the number of people Hezbollah can mobilize for its rallies.
Ideology matters in the Middle East today, regardless of what people tell you. Ideology is still a factor. It's not the only factor, and it's probably not even the most important factor, but it is important, and in the case of Hezbollah, it really makes a difference.
This popularity often runs deep in Lebanese communities abroad. Hezbollah sympathizers include entrepreneurs and businessmen who funnel money to the group back in Lebanon.
Due to the political instability in the country, but also historically, for a long time, Lebanese have migrated across the world. And we find a lot of very successful Shia Lebanese business people in Australia, in West Africa, in South America, in Europe, and even in the United States. And of course, there are certain loyalties. So Hezbollah is receiving support from donations, but also from the business activities, informal, let's say, illegal, also sometimes business activities that are conducted in order to fund the organization.
Yet the diaspora is only one part of the group's global reach. And that brings us to another key thing to know about Hezbollah: its intimate relationship with Iran. Don't take our word for it. This is what Hezbollah's leader had to say about it.
نحن وعلى المكشوف ويمكن هيك شيء بالعالم كله ما فيه انه واحد يطلع علنا وشفاف وصادق وبيقول للعالم كله نحن يا خيي على راس السطح موازنة حزب الله ومعاشاته ومصاريفه وأكله وشربه وسلاحه وصواريخه من الجمهورية الإسلامية في إيران.
And this is how Hezbollah supporters received Iran's then president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, in a visit to Lebanon.
Hezbollah and Iran have a very intimate relationship. It is ideological.
Without Iran, there would certainly be no Hezbollah.
In 1979, there was a turning point in Iran that set the stage for this alliance. A revolution in the country saw Iran's monarchy overthrown and an Islamic republic established instead. Soon afterwards, Hezbollah emerged in Lebanon as one of the many factions fighting in the country's long-running civil war. It was formed as a militia belonging to the Shiite sect of Islam. Iran itself, a Shiite majority country, was there at the very beginning and became a natural ally and supporter to Hezbollah.
When Hezbollah was first being formed in Lebanon out of a motley crew of various Shia militant organizations, Iran, right after the revolution, sent some 1,500 officers to the Bekaa Valley to train these fighters and coalesce them into what became known as Hezbollah, the Party of God. That training included, importantly, not only kind of military training, also ideological training. Not only religious, but specifically ideological, a commitment to the idea of exporting the Iranian Revolution, which was never intended to stop at the borders of Iran.
And right from the beginning, Hezbollah and Iran started acting together in the international arena. Hezbollah carried out multiple attacks in places like Argentina, the UK, and even Lebanon itself.
Hezbollah is the sharp end of the spear that Iran is able to deploy, especially when it wants to do something with reasonable deniability. We know from U.S. Court proceedings in federal court that we know specifically that when Hezbollah started carrying out attacks targeting Western interests, this happened not at Hezbollah's own idea, but at the behest of Iran.
Iran has also used this relationship to gain leverage over Israel, a country it has long vowed to destroy, despite widespread condemnation. In 2006, after capturing 2 Israeli soldiers, Hezbollah was involved in a month-long war with Israel that left many civilians dead on both sides. Iran supplied Hezbollah with arms used in the conflict.
Iran may not be a borderline state with Israel, but by virtue of having Hezbollah, they're effectively a borderline state with Israel.
Hezbollah has also been seen playing a role in major conflicts, and sometimes acting as a proxy for Iran against its enemies, like Saudi Arabia.
Hezbollah is engaged in activity all over the world, sometimes at its own behest and sometimes on behalf of Iran, and most frequently a combination of the two.
Hezbollah is a prototype and at the same time a very special case of Iran trying to gain strategic depth in the Middle East.
Take this example. After the onset of the conflict in Syria in 2011, Hezbollah eventually sent troops to fight on the side of the Assad regime.
Hezbollah's activity in Iraq and in Yemen, its support to militants in Bahrain. This has much more to do with Hezbollah's role in Iran's shadow war with its adversaries, whether it's with the West or other Sunni countries in the region. And Hezbollah has a prominent role to play in those fights. Over the past few years, has Hezbollah really become much more involved as a regional actor? And I do think that this has changed the nature of Hezbollah moving forward. It's unlikely to go back to being just an actor in Lebanon, only targeting Israel or carrying out terrorist attacks around the world out of its own and Iran's interest. It's now also a regional fighting force.
Thanks for watching this edition of Unpacked. There's still so much more we could explain about Hezbollah, whether it's the size of its military wing, other reasons for its popularity in Lebanon and abroad, and the implications of designating it a terror organization.